I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until all beings are free. I believe this talk is being recorded, and so I'll self-introduce by saying that my name is Mushim Patricia Ikeda. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm located on the unceded land of the Confederated Villages of the Lishan Ohlone, conventionally known as Oakland, California, in the United States, where I have made my home for 30 years. I've raised my child here. He went through the Oakland public schools, and I love living in Oakland. The talk that I prepared for you today is a very personal talk, and so I appreciate your kind attention, because I don't even actually know exactly what I'm going to say in parts of it. I'm going to follow my feeling of being here with you. I titled it, Not What I Thought. I've often thought I would like to teach a course on beginning Buddhism that's titled Not What I Thought. Not What I Thought. And the subtitle is Fantasy, Disillusionment, and Reality on the Spiritual Path. I wrote in the description as Black Indigenous people of color, and today is September 16th, 2021. We are deeply aware of multigenerational suffering in our communities and in ourselves. Like most paths of spiritual development, the Buddhist path, in my experience, can be a bumpy one, with periods of what we might call the dark night of the soul. That is a term that applies to all spiritual paths, as well as encounters with teachers who may turn out to be human beings ranging from irrelevant in terms of our needs to deeply flawed. And our own lives may feel deeply uncertain as the global pandemic, climate crisis, and the political polarization here in the United States, if you're in another country, whatever political realities that you're facing, as all of these causes and conditions continue to unfold. Therefore, we might well ask, is there true spiritual refuge in which healing occurs? And if so, how do we find it? If so, how do we find it? And this would be one of the questions that has been a guiding question for me over the past, 40 years? 40 years of my life, as I've been doing Buddhist practice, both as a monastic under a vow of poverty and a householder raising my child in Oakland and working and grocery shopping and all those kinds of things that most of us have to do. And then eventually becoming involved with this wonderful experiment we call East Bay Meditation Center. There is a great deal of talk, and understandably so these days, about the longing to belong. The deep and very painful feeling of being different than in undesirable ways, or even of feeling we're accepted by a spiritual community or a community, but that if people really know who we were inside, they wouldn't like us or love us, the so-called imposter syndrome. And the longing to belong is, of course, part of who we are as human beings. We are social beings. We evolved in clans, in tribes, in social settings, in villages. And there's also, that is true of spiritual life. And it is also true that the path of the meditation practitioner, the spiritual seeker in Buddhism, and not all Buddhists practice meditation, whatever practices one does, but those of us who are spiritual seekers, who seek the truth, who are oriented towards what is called the goal of this path, words in English like awakening, enlightenment, traditionally nibbana or nirvana, which is said to be the extinction of the roots of greed, hatred, and ignorance. A state of peace beyond, well beyond our usual everyday experiences. That's what's held up as the promise of this practice. And so then the question might become, well, gee, where can I find a teacher? Where can I find a guide? Now at East Bay Meditation Center, we have deliberately evolved in a certain way that we believe is healthy, and that is to evolve as a collective. We are not centered around one or two or three charismatic teachers without whom everyone would leave and say, oh, well, that charismatic teacher has gone, so I've got to find another teacher or go somewhere else. We have deliberately evolved to be a collective in which there are many, many different styles of teaching. We are based in Buddhist practices and teachings, and there's a great diversity and variety there. And we come from many different ethnic, socioeconomic, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, disability, many, many different identity groups and backgrounds, once again, deliberately constructed in this project we call East Bay Meditation Center, which is the project of trying to see if we can form what we call a radically inclusive spiritual community based in values of social justice. So just as the Buddhist path is said to have a goal of liberation, East Bay Meditation Center recognizes that without justice, there is no peace. We do not divorce those two movements, the movement towards peace and the movement towards justice, and how best we can embody them within the shifting world in which we live. So, like many people, when I was in my late 20s, I was searching for a teacher. I was searching for a path, and I was such a mess emotionally, and just really didn't know what to do with myself at that time. I just knew I needed something to stabilize myself. And so I thought, oh, it would be so great to find this wonderful spiritual community that's always kind and always ethical and always reliable. And I particularly want an enlightened teacher who has all the answers. So maybe, of course, I wouldn't understand everything. However, I know this teacher would be the fount of all the wisdom, because I certainly don't have it. And that's natural. And it's kind of healthy in its own way. Certainly, we would like to have a spiritual teacher or teachers who have this amazing thing called enlightenment. And I did find a teacher. I was fortunate enough to find a teacher who was a Korean Zen monk named Samu Sinim in 1982 in the Zen Buddhist Temple of Ann Arbor, Michigan. He was fluent in English and is. And so when he says things, he knows exactly what he's saying in English. And one of the most intense and, I don't know, it might be regarded as kind of sacred, highly spiritual parts of the Zen Buddhist practice is the encounter between the Zen teacher and the Zen student, one-on-one and eye to eye. And so I had absorbed what this group was saying and the senior students were saying about, oh, we have a great Zen master and he's filled with wisdom. He was a very wise person. He had been a monk for many years and had practiced very, very deeply. He had to leave his country of origin, Korea, because of the war. And when he arrived in North America, he was literally penniless, and he had had glandular tuberculosis. He knows about suffering. And so part of this practice that we were doing is that we were given, we didn't call it the koan, K-O-A-N, but it was a meditation question which could not be answered by ordinary discursive means. We didn't have Google in those days, but if we did, you couldn't Google the answer. I mean, you could Google an answer, but it wouldn't be the answer. So this was a process, and I was given some kind of meditation question to answer, which I couldn't answer. And I kept going back and back up for interview after interview, getting ever more frustrated and kind of angry and kind of confused and thinking, you know what? Why don't you just give me the frickin' answer? I can't figure this out. I'm the one who's unenlightened. You're unenlightened. So just give me the goods already. This is infuriating, and it's really hard. I'm down there in the meditation hall thinking, well, I can't find the answer by thinking, but if I ignore it and I don't think about it, I'm never going to get an answer. What the hell? All of this was very normal. It's not a nice process. However, you can see it imitates actually the movement of any kind of process of seeking for the deeper truths of life. And so finally, I went into that little horrible room to face the teacher who was sitting in meditation posture. It was always very theatrical. There was like a candle lit and it was dark and scary and all of this kind of stuff. And I felt very inadequate. And so I made my bows and I sat down and I stated the question. And I was at the end of my rope. I was angry. I was irritated. I wanted to be given the answer and the truth and the spiritual truth of everything. I just thought, just hand it over, enlightened teacher. And so I'm sure I looked at him just completely helplessly and full of confusion and angry too. I looked at him and I said, I don't know. I do not know the answer to this question. And that teacher looked at me, and in the coldest, snottiest voice that you can even conceive of, he said to me, do you think I know the answer? Now, I could have punched him in the nose right then and there. I actually felt like it, but luckily didn't. Because I thought, yes, I do think you know the answer. Of course. Why else would you give us questions that you don't even know the answers to. This has really been an incredible waste of time. And this is a very horrible process. And I just felt disappointed and angry and disillusioned. And when I look back on that, that was one of the greatest acts of kindness and compassion that teacher did really early on. Because after I finished kind of silently going through this scenario of punching him in the nose and storming out, all of which you could see, I'm sure, on my face, then, of course, in the next moment, I thought, oh, of course. It would have been really unkind of him to give me some kind of spiritual bypass bullshit answer. He didn't. And I realized at that moment that, yes, the teacher and the teachings and the practices were deeply valued. It wasn't about disrespecting anyone. That this was about pointing me back to myself and knowing that my path was one that was unfolding in a unique way, and that only I would know when I got to the bottom of my own process of questioning. Why is there cruelty in the world? Who am I? What is the purpose of my life? Why are things so hard? Why is there so much suffering? My old friend, Robert Aitken Roshi, who was sometimes called the Dean of American Zen, he died some years ago, said that he felt he had been honored to work with some of his students in the process of what he called spiritual maturity. And I've thought a great deal about that since he said that. I think that spiritual maturity can be a kind of a dance. It's not something, in my point of view, that's ever finally settled, but it's kind of a dance and a movement between perhaps a feeling of aloneness and loneliness, and then a feeling of wanting to be appropriately dependent and attached to a group, a spiritual teacher. Of course, we want to have some version of family, and perhaps our own families of origin were deeply painful and dysfunctional. So we're seeking like a nice family, a good family. And that's very valid. And we're also seeking teachers who there is often a projection that they will be a stand-in for the wise and kind and loving parents or guardians that we did not have. And that's understandable also. So there can be kind of this dance between this feeling of loneliness and isolation, and then dependence on spiritual family and spiritual teachers, and then the breakthrough into interdependence, finding our own place, taking responsibility for our actions, and understanding deeply that, of course, we value the teachers and the teachings, and also our own path will evolve and unfold, often unpredictably, believe me, in its own unspecial way. You don't have to believe that. I'm just sharing my experience. Of course, we seek refuge and we seek safety in this world of danger and threat. And then once again, in my experience, there is spiritual maturity in which we say, okay, I'm not a child anymore. I take responsibility for appropriate leadership and followership. I am grateful for the communities in which I am active, and also sometimes it might be time for me to leave those communities. In some cases, some of us may have had the painful experience of being asked to leave certain communities and groups, or thrown out, to put it rudely. That's very, very painful, and it can happen. So therefore, how do we find our place in the larger universe of all of this coming and going and arising and passing away as our own bodies grow older, and as those we know and love, maybe we don't even like them, they too also pass away and come and go. In the classical teachings of the Buddha, there is a teaching that says, spiritual practitioners, be islands unto yourselves. Be your own refuge, having no other. Let the Dhamma, the teachings, be an island and a refuge to you, having no other. Those who are islands unto themselves should investigate to the very heart of things. What is the source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair? How do they arise? What is their origin? So actually the literal, which is in translation, thank you, Evan put it into the chat as I had requested, and it's found at www Access to Insight, which is a wonderful Dana-based Dharma resource. I look at it all the time. They're translations of the classical suttas or discourses of the Buddha. And this one is called the Attadipa Sutta, an island to oneself. So it literally starts out with an address to the monks, to the monastics. It could be to everyone, though. Monks, be islands unto yourselves. The word that is translated as island is dipa, and it can also mean lamp. So sometimes you'll see translations of this. It says the Buddha said to the people, be a lamp unto yourself. So there's a big difference between a lamp and an island. They're both kind of beautiful. I mean, a lamp, it's like, oh, you're a lamp and you can spread illumination all over the place. A little different as an island. And apparently island is what the scholars and translators say is the better translation because of the context of this. As many of us know, the famous English poet John Donne very famously wrote in a poem, "No man is an island," pointing to our interdependence and our interconnection with one another. And I remember saying that to my Buddhist child when he was little and acting in a way that was not considerate of the rest of the family. And I said to him, you know, the great English poet John Donne, I was an English major in college, I said, the great English poet John Donne said, no man is an island. And he said to me, I am. And then he turned and left the room. Another famous mic drop moment in my humiliating career as a parent. However, he was wrong and I was right. Because unless we're in an unusual situation, we can't just do whatever we feel like doing. If we feel like getting up in the middle of the night and playing loud music, well, maybe we can do it. But maybe we live with other people and they will not like it for understandable reasons. Or maybe we live alone and our neighbors will be like, what the heck? And that's only one very obvious example of the many, many ways in which we're constantly impacting one another, either beneficially or destructively, or in ways that are kind of more neutral. But we're constantly in an ecology with one another affecting one another. There is an archetypal journey, or one archetypal journey of the spiritual seeker. And that is the seeker who starts out full of idealism and hope at finding the perfect spiritual teachers, the perfect spiritual teachings, and the perfect spiritual community in which the teacher and the teachings are being activated. And then falling in love, finding it and being carried away with joy. And then after a shorter or longer period of time, finding out that the teacher is a human being and the spiritual community has its frictions and its tensions and its fights and sometimes stabbing in the back and jockeying for power. And really, it's at this point that spiritual seekers can become either bitter and angry as their faith and their hope. I mean, it's very understandable to become bitter and angry as their faith and their hope is broken. If the teacher has done ethical abuses, very, very heartbreaking. And this has happened, unfortunately, a lot. And there are many Buddhist teachers who have not broken their Sanghas. There is that diversity. So the person can become bitter and angry and say, well, that was useless. That was all for naught. Or if they are fortunate enough to encounter the teaching I did, which was when my teacher said to me, do you think I know the answer? Or this more noble sounding teaching of monks, be islands unto yourselves. Learn how to take, refuge in yourself. Then we can break through and have, again, a very classical spiritual experience of a new groundedness, a new self-sufficiency, which acknowledges our interdependence with others, and then with the knowledge that we really can't usually control other people. Turning towards ourselves to strengthen our own practice in ways that hopefully we can become trustworthy for ourselves and for others. We can know we're imperfect, and yet we try to be honest. We try to be fully present and deeply listen to others and honor their experience. We try, in essence, to learn the meaning of true love. It can be not too hard to fall in love with another person and project all our fantasies and hopes on them. It can be quite another thing when that person reveals themselves to be just like us, to have good days and bad days and grumpiness, perhaps sometimes to be dishonest. That can happen. Mean. To understand that true love takes into account understanding, patience, tolerance, the bigger view, the longer view, and our faith in ourselves as the final refuge of the source of trustworthiness, of whatever wisdom we have, and the continuing commitment to learning as we go, and to understand that our own heart has the capacity to become universally expansive, with compassion, with loving kindness, with empathetic joy, and with the final Brahmavihara, or divine abode, equanimity, which understands that everything arises and passes away except the Dhamma promises Everything arises and passes away, but the awakened awaken forever. Thank you. I'm curious too, but since the historical Buddha lived 2,600 years ago, I have no way of knowing. I do have some Christian friends who say that their understanding of Jesus Christ is that he was a perfected human being. And one of my friends, Andrina, is so wonderful. And she said, he did have brothers and sisters. And he said, can you imagine how annoying it must have been to have this older brother who was a perfect human being? Like, never got mad, never swore, never lied. And so here we go from then a man who leaves his wife and baby, ... perfect, question mark. So I don't really know what a perfected human being is. And let me tell you that my understanding is from the story that's come down to us. This is a theory that it said that the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, there have been many Buddhists, but this Buddha who appeared in human form as the result of an evolution of many, many lifetimes of spiritual practice and realization, that it's posited that he attained final, complete, and perfect enlightenment, which could be defined as forever uprooting the causes of greed, hatred, and ignorance. In my understanding, however, that did not make him any perfect anything, because one could still say, that doesn't mean that you're psychically know everything. So one could still say really insensitive things or things which unintentionally hurt other people's feelings. And it's said in the classical teachings that when, the Buddha got older, and he lived to quite a ripe old age for a person of his time and culture. I think he died when he was around 80. It's said of food poisoning. What a way to go. That as he got older, he would say to his disciples, this body is breaking down and my back hurts and I'm tired and not doing too well today. And I'm saying that because I turned 67 this year, so the aging process is really setting in, and it is no joke. So I wouldn't worry too much about perfect. However, as Thich Nhat Hanh, one of the great teachers I feel of our time, says, we don't have to, when we say we use the North Star to guide ourselves by, to navigate by, we don't expect that we're going to arrive at the North Star. To go north, we can go in the direction of the North Star, and then we do get farther north. But because we say that's our guiding star, we don't expect to get to the North Star. So we can say we want to become kinder. We want to become more compassionate. We want to become wiser. Those are my goals anyway, without thinking, I'm going to become some, textbook perfect, wise, or compassionate person. It's not something I personally worry about. And I do try to go in the direction of improving myself. Yes, it does. Oh, I'm so glad that you brought that out. That is one of, if you like, you can take that on as your koan, your meditation question. What the heck does that mean? If everything is impermanent, and so it would be my understanding, I'm not a trained Buddhist scholar, that in the meditation we're doing here, insight or mindfulness meditation, comes from I guess it could be called the older strata of Buddhism, the Theravada, Theravada, literally translating as Path of the Elders. And my understanding that is in that set of teachings, it is said that yes, most of what we observe of reality is impermanent in the sense of unstable. It's always changing, always changing, always changing. Being born, getting older, dying. And then the teachings do say, however, there is that dimension, or don't say dimension, they just say there is that, which is called the unborn, capital U, and the unconditioned, capital U. The unborn and the unconditioned. So in the tradition that I come from, Zen, the question would be, what is the unborn? Where is the unconditioned? And I can't answer that for you, sorry. However, it's something to consider. Thank you. That's, I think, a really important question. And it's natural for any individual, myself included, to resonate more with some teachers and their delivery of the Dharma than others. At the same time, I have seen so many people, and I've gone through my own cycles, I've seen so many people who fixate on maybe one or two teachers and then feel that everything that comes out of them is sort of this ultimate spiritual statement that, and even unfortunately, it's not unknown that in some cases, in some communities, teachers who are considered to be quote unquote enlightened, who have acted cruelly and unethically, it's been interpreted by their students to say, well, we just don't understand that because that's enlightened behavior and it occurs in some other dimension. That's actually pretty common, and it's one of the saddest and most painful and most angering things that I've seen happen time and time again in the time that I've been practicing. And so I would say follow the Dalai Lama's advice, which I read many years ago. And His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama said, as I recall this, he said, yeah, people want to find a teacher. Be careful and be slow. Don't just rush toward a teacher and say, wow, these teachings are fabulous and they seem so enlightened, so will you be my teacher, or you are my teacher? Instead, he said, no, hang out with that person for years and observe them closely. Observe them when they're teaching and try to observe them when they're not teaching in their everyday life. I don't think he meant see, and they never yell at their kids or something like that. He himself has said, I get impatient and I yell at my staff. What he meant was, look at them over time in a realistic and mature way. And then he said, if after many years you feel, yes, this is the person whom I would like to be my teacher, then you go and you ask. You don't just even assume, well, okay, you're my teacher because I want you to be. Then you ask, would you please be my teacher? Maybe they'll say yes, and maybe they'll say no. But I think that you're all very wise, and you can see in that advice that it is a path of discernment that requires maturity, patience, and the ability to slow down and be with the teacher as a human being, observe them in many different situations, and then to be with them in a mature and responsible spiritual relationship. As many of you know, my go-to dedication of merit comes from the great Buddhist teacher Shantideva, from the last chapter, which is called Dedication of Merit, in the great spiritual work, the Bodhicharyavatara, A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Also coming up in October, I will be teaching, I don't know, maybe for the fourth time, something like that, by the request of the Sangha, the Path of the Bodhisattva class series. Bodhisattva is from the Northern or Mahayana tradition of Buddhism. Their vows are my particular vows, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh. Many of us, some of us here, have taken the Bodhisattva vows, which is to return again and again in order to help decrease suffering in the world. Shantideva, dedication of merit. May all beings everywhere plagued with sufferings of body and mind obtain an ocean of happiness and joy because of the goodness that we, the people of Color Sangha, have generated by practicing together this evening. May the naked find clothing and the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth and those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find new hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power and may people think of benefiting one another. May all travelers, including yourselves, find happiness wherever you go. Without any effort, may you accomplish whatever you have set out to do. For as long as space endures, for as long as living beings remain. Until then, may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your sincere practice and your desire to help decrease suffering, increase joy, and help all beings to attain liberation.